The shoebox was gritty with garage dust, the kind that settles into corrugated cardboard and never quite washes out, and inside it my late husband had left me a leather journal with 4 lines of handwriting that would eventually put my son in a helmet reading Perjurer on probation. 2 years later, I own a $2 million electric bike company built on the ashes of his fraud, and Jason reports to work at 7:30 sharp every morning. My name is Evelyn, 52 years old, and for 30 years I was the wife of a quiet architect named Frank, who designed colonials with wraparound porches and never once raised his voice. Before I met him, I spent 8 years as the head bookkeeper for a mid-sized construction firm in Tallahassee, the kind of job where you learn to spot a 5-cent discrepancy in a general ledger and know exactly which subcontractor padded his invoice. That skill set slept for decades while I raised our son and managed our household budget on graph paper with a mechanical pencil. It woke up fast when Frank died of pancreatic cancer 6 months after his diagnosis, and I was still holding his reading glasses, still smelling his aftershave on the pillowcase, when the first wave of betrayal rolled in wearing the face of my only child. Jason was 31, Frank's golden boy, the kind of son who could charm a loan officer into waiving fees and then forget to say thank you. I loved him, but a mother sees the cracks. He had cycled through a half-dozen ventures, a food truck that lasted 4 months, a dropshipping scheme that left a garage full of unsold phone cases, a consultancy with no clients. When he came to me 3 months after Frank's funeral with a polished business plan for an electric bike franchise, I wanted to believe. He had a letter of intent from a regional developer, a glossy brochure, and a need for $200,000. I sold my 2-bedroom condo in Sarasota, the one I'd bought with my own savings at 35 before I even met Frank, and handed him a cashier's check for $212,000. In return, Jason signed a partnership agreement drafted by his own attorney, granting me 49% equity in EcoCycle Holdings LLC with his wife Tessa holding the managing 1%. I insisted on a notary. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Frank had sketched additions on napkins. The notary's stamp thumped and Jason hugged me. "We're building something together, Mom," he said. I believed him. Frank's funeral was a closed casket affair at St. Anne's, the kind where you stand in a humidity-thick foyer and receive murmured condolences from people who haven't seen you in a decade. Within 24 hours, the vultures landed. Jason and Tessa pulled into my driveway in a black Escalade with temporary tags that I would later find out were leased the same week using a shell company account. Tessa is a real estate agent with an Instagram grid that looks like a catalog for life no one actually lives. White kitchens, gold flatware, captions about manifesting abundance. She spent the first hour after the funeral rearranging my living room with brisk, efficient movements, tossing Frank's reading glasses, his chipped coffee mug with the architectural firm's logo, and a framed photo of us at the Grand Canyon into a cardboard box she had labeled "Donate" in Sharpie. I stood in the doorway, still in my black dress, watching Frank's life get sorted like junk mail. Jason was in the kitchen, not mourning, not even pretending. He had a yellow legal pad and was making a list: deed to the house, keys to the safe deposit box at First Mutual, login credentials for the joint checking account, the life insurance policy number. He asked me these things with a soft, rehearsed voice, the voice of someone who has practiced comforting a widow in the mirror. "Mom, we just want to make sure everything is protected. You don't need to worry about any of this right now." I was fogged with grief, the kind that makes your limbs feel like they are moving through cold syrup. I let them take over. I sat in Frank's recliner, the one with the worn left armrest from his drafting elbow, while Tessa boxed up his studio. She filled 3 boxes in 40 minutes. His fountain pen collection, his scale ruler with the brass edges, a half-finished watercolor of the backyard oak. Then Jason walked into the garage and came back holding Frank's old shoebox, the one he'd kept tucked behind the paint cans on the top shelf, the one with a faded Nike logo and a lid secured by a rubber band. He held it by one corner, arm extended like it contained something that might bite. "Just old tax forms, Mom, nothing you need, I'll toss it." Tessa didn't even glance up from a drawer of drafting templates she was emptying into the donate box. Something snagged in my chest. Frank was never careless with his papers. He filed everything alphabetically, cross-referenced by project. That shoebox was an outlier, a deliberate cache. I waited until they left for an early dinner at some steakhouse Tessa wanted to review for her blog. I waited until I heard the Escalade's engine fade past the cul-de-sac. Then I walked barefoot into the garage, concrete cold against my soles, and lifted the lid of the black garbage bin they'd parked by the workbench. The shoebox sat on top of a bag of yard clippings. I pulled it out, wiped the dust on my dress, and carried it to the kitchen table. Inside, under a stack of outdated IRS forms and a warranty for a lawnmower we'd sold in 2008, I found a leather journal. It was small, 6 by 4 inches, with a cracked brown cover and pages yellowed at the edges. Frank had carried it during his apprenticeship 35 years ago. I'd seen it a dozen times over the years, always tucked in his workshop drawer, never opened. I almost set it aside, but I flipped to the back, the way you do with notebooks, looking for the last entry. On the very last page, in Frank's tight architectural script, the kind where every letter is a tiny drawing, blue fountain pen ink bleeding slightly into the paper fibers, were 4 lines. They were smudged as if he'd closed the journal before the ink fully dried. They read, "Evie, do not trust him. He will bleed you dry, save yourself." I read it 7 times. I traced the indent of the pen strokes with my fingertip. Frank had never spoken a word against Jason in 3 decades. Not once. But architects don't mean maybe. They mean foundation, load-bearing walls, things that cannot shift. The warning sat in my hands, cold and exact, just as I heard the Escalade's headlights sweep the front window. I tucked the journal into the waistband of my jeans under my sweater, the leather warm against my skin, and walked back into the living room as if nothing had changed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that blood does not excuse fraud, and that a mother's signature is not a blank check. That night, Jason laid out what he called a transition plan on the kitchen island. He had 3 documents, freshly printed, still warm from the Staples Copy Center, a durable power of attorney that would give him and Tessa complete legal authority over my finances and medical decisions. A quitclaim deed transferring my house, free and clear, into a family trust they controlled. And a consolidation agreement that folded all of Frank's remaining retirement accounts, about $180,000, into that same trust, managed solely by Jason and Tessa as co-trustees. Tessa kept patting my hand with her manicured fingers and calling it a compassionate conservatorship. She said the word compassionate the way a realtor says charming fixer-upper. She kept saying, "We'll handle all the hard stuff, Evelyn. You just focus on healing." Jason uncapped a Montblanc pen, the heavy one Frank had given him for college graduation, and set it on the counter. "Mom, we really need you to sign these tonight so we can protect your future. The estate taxes alone could wipe you out if we don't move fast. Probate is a nightmare." He spoke in a hushed, urgent tone, the way you'd warn someone about a gas leak. I played the fog. 30 years of marriage had taught me a few things about performance, and I let my eyes go distant and watery. My voice came out thin and threadbare. "I'm so tired, Jason. My head feels full of cotton. Can we do this tomorrow? I just need a couple of days. I can't think straight." Tessa's smile tightened at the corners, the micro-expression of someone who has timed a deposit deadline and is watching it slip. "Of course, Evelyn, we're not rushing you. Take all the time you need." But Jason's jaw flexed. I saw the muscle jump below his ear. They needed me to sign before the grief fog lifted, before I had a chance to talk to a lawyer or even to a friend, so I gave them the performance of a lifetime. Shaky hands that spilled a glass of water, sentences that trailed off unfinished, a willing, pathetic agreement to move into their guest bedroom, just for a little while until I feel stronger. Jason smiled. He thought he had me. 2 days later, he packed my house, changed the locks, and drove me to a 3-story colonial in a gated community 40 minutes away. Tessa took my car keys for safety. She set up my guest room with a high-end baby monitor on the nightstand, the camera angled directly at my bed, and said it was so she could hear me if I needed anything in the night. The first week I stayed in my room, performing grief loudly enough for the monitor to register. I cried at scheduled intervals. I shuffled to the bathroom slowly, holding the wall. But while my body played the shattered widow, my mind was cataloguing everything, every floorboard creak, every muffled phone call behind Jason's office door, every time Tessa slammed a cabinet. Jason's business had been a low thrum of stress for months, even before Frank got sick. I'd heard him on the phone at Christmas, his voice tight about cash flow and margin compression. Now I heard it collapsing. He would pace the upstairs hallway at 11 at night, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a harsh whisper I could just catch from the air vent that connected my room to the corridor. "I told you we'd have the capital by Friday. No, she hasn't signed the trust yet. Give me another 10 days. I can't force it, she's fragile. It's a delicate situation." On the other end, I'd hear a tinny, angry voice. "Then Jason, I know the Aspen deposit is due. I know, I'll get it." Tessa would come home from showings in her pristine white blazer and slam her hand on the granite kitchen island. One afternoon I crept to the top of the stairs and heard her clearly. "If she doesn't sign the trust by the 20th, we can't close on the house in Aspen. The builder's attorney sent a demand letter. We lose the earnest money, $55,000, and the whole thing blows up. Jason, you told me this would be wrapped up by now." He made a sound I couldn't interpret. She went on. "We've got the shoreline payment due on the 1st, the Escalade lease, my Amex is maxed, and the franchise revenue isn't covering it. You need to get her signature. I don't care if you have to hold her hand and guide the pen." I absorbed every syllable. They were bleeding out, using borrowed money and fraudulent credit to fund a lifestyle that depended entirely on stealing my inheritance and the assets of a company I partly owned. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went, and I needed evidence that would survive a courtroom. I was not just a grieving widow. I was a bookkeeper with 20 years of forensic-level attention to detail, and I had a set of lockpicks in my jewelry box. That skill came from a summer job I'd had at 19, working the counter at my uncle's hardware store in Gainesville. The local locksmith, a patient man named Ellis, taught me to rekey for closed properties. He gave me a beginner's set of picks, a tension wrench, a short hook, a city rake. I'd practiced on old deadbolts in the storeroom until I could open a standard pin tumbler in under 2 minutes. I kept the set for decades in a small leather case, more as a keepsake than a tool. Frank used to laugh and call me the family safecracker. I never thought I'd use it to break into my own son's office. The opportunity to prove my usefulness and to establish cover for my movements in the house came on the 8th night. The guest bathroom sink started dripping, a steady, metronomic plink that I could hear even over the baby monitor's static hum. The next morning I told Jason the faucet was leaking. He glanced at Tessa and she gave a tiny shrug. "I'll call a plumber next week," he said. "We're a little strapped right now, maybe Tuesday." Tuesday was 6 days away. The dripping was loud enough to make sleep difficult and I saw my opening. "Frank taught me basic plumbing," I said, my voice still in widow mode, soft and hesitant. "I can fix it. It's probably just a cartridge." Tessa's eyebrows shot up. "You, Evelyn, are you sure? We don't want you to strain yourself." I nodded and made my way slowly to the garage, where I rummaged through Frank's old toolbox they had dumped in a corner along with his drafting stool. I found a pipe wrench, a set of Allen keys, and a flathead screwdriver. Back in the bathroom, I shut off the supply valves under the sink, unscrewed the handle, removed the retaining nut and pulled out the worn cartridge. The rubber O-ring was cracked. I walked to the hardware store, bought a replacement for $4.70 and had the whole thing reassembled and drip-free in 22 minutes. When I came out wiping my hands on a rag, Tessa and Jason were standing in the hallway. Tessa's mouth was slightly open. Jason just stared. For the first time since the funeral, I saw something other than greedy calculation on their faces, a flicker of uncertainty, a recalibration. They hadn't known I could do anything except grieve. That same night, Jason and Tessa attended a charity gala at the country club, a black tie event where Tessa had been angling for a seat on the board. She wore an emerald necklace that I'd later learn was rented. They left me with a frozen lasagna and the baby monitor glowing on the nightstand. I waited until I heard the garage door rumble shut, then I counted to 300. Then I walked barefoot down the hall to Jason's home office. The door had a standard Schlage deadbolt with a 5-pin tumbler. I knelt, removed the leather case from my pocket, and selected the tension wrench and a shallow city rake. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied light rotational pressure with my right thumb, and began raking the pins with a steady back and forth motion. I felt each pin set one by one, first the front pin, low and shallow, a small click transmitted through the wrench like a heartbeat. Then the second, slightly higher. The third pin was a security spool. I felt the false set, the subtle rotation of the plug, then I eased pressure and lifted it again until it clicked clean. The fourth and fifth pins set in quick succession. The plug turned, the bolt slid back, and I was in. 98 seconds. The office was a monument to Jason's self-image. A glass-topped desk with chrome legs, an Aeron chair, framed photos of him shaking hands with a congressman, him cutting a ribbon at a storefront, but the real information was in a 2-drawer filing cabinet tucked behind the desk. The top drawer held vendor contracts, electric bike maintenance manuals, and a folder of insurance documents. It was unlocked and contained nothing incriminating. The bottom drawer was secured with a cheap wafer lock, the kind you find on office furniture, and it yielded to a thin metal ruler I pulled from his desk supplies. I slid the ruler between the drawer face and the cabinet frame, depressed the wafer, and the drawer slid open. Inside I found a black 3-ring binder labeled EcoCycle Holdings LLC Corporate Records, and a thick manila envelope with a string and button closure. The binder held the original partnership agreement. My genuine signature was there in blue ink, the same pen I'd used at my kitchen table. I recognized the loop on the Y in Evelyn, the one that always turned right before looping back, a distinctive flourish I'd had since 7th grade cursive class. Paper-clipped behind that agreement, however, was a document I had never seen, a letter of gift dated 3 weeks after the partnership formation. It stated that the $212,000 I'd transferred was an irrevocable gift, not a capital contribution, and that I relinquished all claims to equity, profit sharing, and voting rights. My name was signed at the bottom, but the signature was a forgery. A wrong one. My Y loops right. This one looped left, the tail dragging downward like a drooping stem. The pen pressure was too uniform, the flow too smooth, none of the slight tremor I've had since I broke my wrist in 2002. I knew a forensic document examiner would spot it in seconds, but I also knew I didn't need one to be certain. The manila envelope held the sale agreement. Jason had negotiated a deal to sell the entire EcoCycle franchise, its trademark, its inventory, its lease agreements, and its goodwill, to a larger e-bike conglomerate called Volt Stream Mobility for $1.6 million. The closing date was 41 days away. The contract listed Jason and Tessa as the sole owners, with a notarized affidavit from the original investor. That was me, confirming the gift and disclaiming any ownership interest. My forged signature appeared on 4 separate pages. I also found a loan document from a hard money commercial lender called Shoreline Capital, $400,000 at an 11% annual interest rate, collateralized by all assets of EcoCycle Holdings LLC, and personally guaranteed by me, with my forged initials on every page. 27 sets of initials. The loan had funded 6 weeks prior, and the proceeds had been wired to an account at a regional bank I didn't recognize. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding against my ribs. They hadn't just stolen my investment, they had buried me under a predatory loan that would survive any bankruptcy, that would attach to my name and follow me to the grave. Then I found the third file, nearly buried under a stack of outdated local business licenses. It was a trademark assignment document, prepared but unsigned, titled Assignment of U.S. Trademark Registration No. 5, 847, 231 EcoCycle. A yellow sticky note was affixed to the cover page, written in Jason's hasty scrawl. Needs Mom's in-person affidavit and notarized consent. USPTO requirement. Frank's original filing included co-creator clause. I stared at that note. Frank, the quiet architect who had filed the trademark registration for Jason's business as a favor 2 years ago, had built a dead man's switch into the very foundation of the intellectual property. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office application listed 2 originators of the mark, Jason as the commercial user, and Evelyn A. Carver as the brand consultant who had developed the logo concept and tagline. Frank had included me as a co-creator, and under USPTO rules, any assignment or transfer of the mark required the in-person, notarized consent of both recorded owners. If one owner was deceased, the survivor's consent alone was sufficient, but it couldn't be waived by power of attorney. Jason could sell the physical bikes, the lease, the shelving, but he could not sell the brand name, the customer list, or the domain without me standing in front of a notary and signing an affidavit. That was Frank's lock. That was the quiet architect's final blueprint. I took photos of everything with my phone, close-ups of the forged signatures, the loan terms, the trademark file, the sticky note. Then I relocked the filing cabinet and the office door, retreated to my room and sat on the bed in the dark. I had the proof, but I needed an ally with institutional power, someone who could turn my photographs into an indictment. The next morning, while Jason was at the franchise's storefront and Tessa was showing a colonial to a young couple, I used the landline in the kitchen. I dialed the number on the Shoreline Capital letterhead, the contact listed as Compliance Officer Diane Caruso. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. She sounded about my age with a voice that had spent decades in banking compliance, the kind of voice that has heard every variation of a lie. I introduced myself calmly. My name is Evelyn Carver. My forged signatures are on your $400,000 loan to EcoCycle Holdings. I am the victim, not the guarantor. I have photographic evidence and original documents. May I meet with you? There was a pause, the kind that meant someone was mentally refiling a case. Diane asked me a series of verification questions. My date of birth, the last 4 of my social, the address on the forged deed. I answered each one, and then I described the discrepancies in the signatures. She listened without interrupting. Finally she said, Mrs. Carver, this loan was flagged by our underwriting algorithm 3 weeks ago because the co-signer's credit profile was inconsistent with the application data. A corrected form came in, but the signature images didn't match our biometric scanner. I've been building an internal fraud file since then, but I needed the real Evelyn Carver to step forward. I think we should meet. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop called the Daily Grind just outside the gated community at 10 the next morning. I told Jason and Tessa I wanted to walk to the community park for fresh air, a widow's need for sunlight. Tessa barely looked up from her iPad. I walked a half-mile to the coffee shop, a small brick building with a faded awning and a barista who knew everyone's order. Diane Caruso was already there, mid-50s, a navy blazer over a silk shell, reading glasses on a chain, a leather portfolio open in front of her. She had the patient, methodical posture of someone who has spent a career auditing loan files. We sat in a corner booth, and I handed her my phone with the photos. She scrolled through them, zooming in on signatures, cross-referencing dates. She whispered to herself, "This gift letter is dated after the LLC formation, but the partnership agreement is notarized. They can't both be true." Then she laid out what she already knew. The shoreline loan had been approved on the strength of Jason's business plan and my purported co-signature. The funds were dispersed into a shell company, JCT Holdings LLC, which Jason had registered in Wyoming. From there, the money moved in 3 tranches. A $55,000 wire to an escrow account in Colorado for the Aspen property deposit, a $12,000 payment to the Escalade leasing company, and a $30,000 wire to a timeshare developer in Cabo San Lucas. The rest was being siphoned off in smaller transfers to cover Tessa's Amex bills and Jason's personal expenses. Interest-only payments were due monthly, and the first one was already 8 days late. The Vault Stream sale would trigger an acceleration clause requiring full repayment of the principal, but Jason intended to pay off the loan at closing and pocket the remaining $1.2 million, leaving me as the guarantor if the deal fell through, and the loan went into default. Diane had already filed a suspicious activity report with FinCEN, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit, but she needed a key piece of evidence, the original partnership agreement with my authentic signature, to compare against the forgery for a forensic audit. She told me the FBI's local field office had an open investigation into elder financial exploitation, and this case would fit perfectly if I could get her the originals. I told her I could retrieve them. That Sunday, while Jason and Tessa were gone for a 3-hour brunch with Tessa's parents, I returned to the office, pulled the binder, the manila envelope, and the trademark file, and bundled everything into a reusable canvas grocery bag. I met Diane at the same coffee shop, where she had set up a portable scanner and a notary. She scanned every page, had me sign an affidavit of authenticity on the genuine signature, and then instructed me to mail the originals to a secure post office box for the FBI's white-collar crime unit. "They'll need chain of custody," she said, "but this evidence is enough to freeze the sale and begin an arrest warrant. I'll coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office." We shook hands, a firm, professional grip. I walked back to Jason's house with the empty grocery bag and a feeling I hadn't had in months, the beginning of control. Now I needed the moment that would sever any remaining hope. In every one of these stories, there is a line where the antagonist reveals they have no humanity left, and until I saw that line with my own eyes, some pathetic part of me still thought Jason might have a flicker of conscience. I staged a medical event. I had brought with me a small brown glass vial from my own medicine cabinet, a bottle of ipecac syrup I'd kept for years, the kind they used to recommend for poisoning emergencies before the guidelines changed. I knew that a few drops in coffee would induce violent vomiting without lasting harm. I prepared the scene. I placed a folder on the coffee table in the living room, a fake trademark assignment affidavit I had typed up and printed, made to look like the one Jason needed. I positioned my phone recording video in a wide shot from a bookshelf behind a row of Frank's old architecture monographs. The angle captured the couch, the floor, and the table. Then I added the ipecac to my morning decaf and waited. The nausea hit hard and fast, a rising tide of stomach acid and involuntary retching. I collapsed in the living room, clutching my chest, making choking sounds, my face turning a credible shade of crimson. Jason and Tessa came running from the kitchen. I lay on the carpet, one arm flung out toward the coffee table, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Jason stopped. His eyes went to my face for maybe half a second, then they locked onto the folder. He bent down not to check my pulse or clear my airway but to snatch that folder. He flipped it open, scanning the pages. She signed it. Did she actually sign the affidavit? Tessa hovered behind him, her hand to her mouth, her gaze flicking between my crumpled body and the paper. Jason, she's not breathing right. He didn't look up. Is this the notarized copy? There's no stamp. Then he crouched beside me, not to help, but to lift my limp left hand. I felt him press my thumb against something cold and sticky, an ink pad he must have grabbed from his office. He rolled my thumb onto the signature line of the affidavit, leaving a neat, clean print. He was forging my fingerprint on a legal document while I lay dying at his feet. He said, "This will hold. The notary can stamp it later. Get the car." He stood, stepped over my torso without breaking stride, and walked out of the room. Tessa followed, her heels clicking on hardwood, leaving me on the floor. I lay there for a full 60 seconds, listening to the sound of the garage door opening. Then I got up, wiped the ink off my thumb with a wet wipe from my pocket, and retrieved my phone. The video captured everything: the ink pad, the thumb press, the step over my body. I watched it twice. That was the end of Jason as my son. He was now only a defendant. The confrontation came 3 days before the Vault Stream sale closing. Diane had informed me that the buyer's attorney had been notified of the trademark dispute, the forged paperwork, and the federal investigation. The sale was frozen. Jason and Tessa came home that afternoon in a panic, their faces tight. Jason burst into my room without knocking. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding at the title office. We need to go sign the trademark affidavit in person. Right now. I've got a notary waiting. Get your coat." His voice was clipped, all the faux gentleness burned away. Tessa stood behind him, arms crossed, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. I nodded. "All right, let me get my shoes." I put on the grey wool coat Frank had bought me for our 20th anniversary, the one with the deep pockets that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and I sat quietly in the back of the Escalade while Jason drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was talking too fast, telling me it was just a simple form, that it would protect the family, that it was what Frank would have wanted. I said nothing. We arrived at the title company's office, a sterile suite on the 4th floor of a commercial building. The conference room had a long walnut table, a notary public seated at the head with her stamp and logbook, and 3 other people I recognized. Diane Caruso in her navy blazer, 2 men in dark suits who were plainly FBI agents, and a woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office with a leather briefcase. Jason was so focused on shoving a pen into my hand and guiding me toward the signature line that he didn't register them until one of the agents stood and said his name. "Jason Carver, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and elder financial exploitation." His face went from red to white in a heartbeat. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and fell to the carpet. He started to yell, something about how this was a mistake, that his mother was confused, that she had dementia and didn't know what she was doing. But the agents were already reading him his rights, his wrists cuffed behind his back with a double lock. Tessa tried to slide out the side door, but a female agent intercepted her with a calm, almost bored professionalism. "Ma'am, you're not free to leave." The notary quietly recorded the nullification of the unsigned affidavit and stamped a cancellation note. Diane caught my eye and gave a single nod. I did not speak, but I did not look away from Jason either. He saw me watching as they led him out. The aftermath was methodical, public, and deeply satisfying. The franchise sale to Vault Stream imploded when the fraud allegations surfaced, and the buyer walked away within 48 hours. Shoreline Capital filed a civil suit for loan fraud and secured a freeze on all of Jason's accounts. The FBI's case moved quickly because the evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the loan trail, the video of him stepping over me to ink my thumb. Jason pled down to 3 felony counts of wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. He received 5 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a restitution order totaling the full $400,000 plus interest, to be garnished from any future earnings and from the liquidation of the Aspen deposit and the Escalade. Tessa was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, got probation, lost her real estate license for 3 years, and was ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution. Their gated colonial went into foreclosure, and the timeshare was surrendered. Tessa's Instagram switched to private, then disappeared. I received quiet, earned restitution. Because Jason had forged the gift letter and the loan personally, the court ruled that my 49% equity in EcoCycle Holdings was fully intact. The trademark reverted solely to me, and since the sale was void, I retained all physical assets: 34 electric bikes in various states of assembly, a suite of charging stations, a repair bay with diagnostic tools, and the lease on a storefront with a prime downtown location. I rebranded the company. The new name came to me while I was sorting through Frank's journal, Mama's Revenge Rides. I designed a logo that shows a vintage bicycle with a rolling pin crossed behind it like swords, and I launched a marketing campaign built on the story of a mother who was underestimated and fought back. The local news did a segment. A regional business journal wrote a profile. Within 18 months, the company's valuation hit $2 million, and I expanded to 3 locations. Every tax form is exact, every contract is notarized, and my signature has never been more carefully guarded. Jason, unable to find anyone who would hire a convicted felon with forgery on his record, was required by his probation terms to maintain gainful employment. So I offered him a job. Delivery driver, minimum wage, 30 hours a week, 5 days a week. The probation officer approved it, and one non-negotiable condition, mandated by the court and by me, is that during every shift he wears a custom helmet, midnight blue with reflective yellow block lettering, that reads Perjurer on probation. He accepted because he had no choice. I see him sometimes when I visit the flagship store, pedaling one of my bikes through the downtown streets, that helmet catching the sun like a beacon. I don't wave. I just watch, and then I go back inside to sign a few authentic papers with my own authentic hand. Frank's journal sits on my nightstand now. The last line of that warning, "Save yourself," wasn't just a cry from the grave. It was a blueprint, and I followed it down to the final detail. Integrity is a lock no pick can open, and family boundaries are the strongest deadbolt I've ever installed. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If you believe that justice can arrive wearing a bike helmet and a pair of practical shoes, hit like and subscribe for more real-life stories of redemption. I'm your narrator, and remember, never sign a single line without reading every letter, and never let anyone underestimate what a mother knows.